When you look out ahead, the big broad trends that are coming, how do you think about how to think about it?
Understanding biology is different now. There's much better understanding what causes disease. There's a lot of innovation right now, and the big areas are obesity, neurology, inflammation and autoimmunity, cardiology, kidney diseases, and of course, cancer. Innovation will carry the day. We're all human beings. We all need new therapies and innovation. And so we do think the sector will come back, and there's going to be another kind of heyday for biotech. We're constructive. I wouldn't say we're bullish on the sector right now. We're constructive, and I think valuations are very appropriate and frankly attractive.
The Money Talk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth with Kim Parlee.
Yaron, it's great to have you with us. Really appreciate the time today. Before we get into a really deep conversation, you know so much about the sector, and I just want, if we can just get a little bit of your wisdom over the next hour, that would be awesome. Tell us who you are, what you do, and how you got there.
Yeah, Kim, thanks for having me, I believe, again, on your show. We appreciate it. So I started my career in med school and business school, and then afterwards I did about a year of business development in biotech. And at that point, I actually came accountant originally as an associate. So we started about 25 years ago. Spent the first 3 years of my career at Cowen as an associate, then as an analyst. Then 12 years at another bank at Citi, and then about 3.5 years as a chief financial and chief business officer of a small biotech. We went from private to public. Cowen was one of our biggest shareholders, and we went public through Citigroup and Cowen. And that ultimately led the entree back to return to Cowen. And that was about 8 years ago.
Yaron, there's a lot of ways, I think, to look at, what is happening in the sector. But when you look out ahead, the big broad trends that are coming, how do you think about how to think about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. The broad trends are number one, and I know you'll ask that later on. It's the capital markets. Biotech right now is out of favor, and when is that gonna change, revert back to a more normal time? Because obviously that capital dynamic is very important for young biotech companies. But the more major trends are there's a lot of innovation right now in terms of making new drugs for patients who need them, or developing new drugs that are better than what's currently offered in the market. And the big areas are obesity, neurology, inflammation and autoimmunity, where the body's literally attacking itself, cardiology, kidney diseases, and of course, cancer. Another question, how do you make these drugs and all the innovation relating to that? How do you find new targets, understanding how the body works better? And then finally, who pays for it? How good is reimbursement and how good is access and pricing on a global basis?
All right, let's dig into the first ones. When you talked about, I guess, the size of these markets and what illnesses are being treated. I think I was reading in one of your reports that chronic conditions. Again, these are, I'm sure if you're a drug company, you're looking at potential where you can make money. Some of these are multi-billion-dollar potential in some of these areas. Let's start with obesity. That is one, I think, that, I think you'd be hidden under a rock if you haven't heard about some of the work that's being done on obesity. But maybe tell us where that is in terms of, the drugs that are being created and maybe where it's going, because I think some people might think it's saturated.
Yeah, so it's definitely not saturated. It's a great point. It's a good entry point. So the market right now, between diabetes and obesity is probably at around 60 billion, really driven right now by two big companies, Lilly and Novo. As we all know, they make like a Wegovy or Mounjaro or Zepbound. These are the once daily GLP-1 injectables. They're dominant. The big question has been whether reimbursement will get better over time. They are approved for obesity and diabetes, but as you know, they do multiple other things. They improve outcomes by reducing knee replacement procedures, by improving sleep apnea, better cardiovascular mortality, reducing kidney diseases. I mean, they're fairly profound once you obviously get someone's weight under control. But they are daily. The big question is still whether Medicare will ultimately reimburse them. Medicare is the big U.S. plan, the U.S. government plan for the elderly, and right now it does not approve. It's not covering GLP-1s, and we'll see whether that's going to change over time. That's going to drive the market opportunity. We think the market's probably going to go from about 60 billion to anywhere between 150 to 200 billion. Mind you, recall up to about 6 to 12 months ago, these companies couldn't make enough of these drugs. I mean, there's literally tens of millions of patients are taking these drugs globally. And so there's a lot of compounder pharmacies that you probably have heard about, and people are buying them out of pocket for 300, $400, dollars a month, and they're not approved. Um, it's not going to be that clear that these can get pulled off the market, and so they are going to make a dent into what the branded market's going to be. But right now, GLP-1s are continuing to grow really, really well. But there's a lot of innovation, and the innovation has to do. Amgen is developing a drug called Meritide, and it's a GLP-1 slash GIP antagonist. It's another a glucagon-like peptide and a gastric inhibitory peptide, two sort of mechanisms together, and that's injection every month.
And so just Yaron, just because just for people who may not be familiar, just the GLP-1, is this something that makes you feel full? Like, is that the intent? Is that what it does?
Great question. So a GLP-1 is literally a hormone that is secreted by your gut to make you feel like you're full, make you digest sugar and food better, and also has a feedback back to your brain saying, "Hold on, we're full. No need to eat anymore." So it's acting both locally in the gut and in the brain on the hunger satiety centers, and that's why it's so effective.
Yeah, and sorry, you were saying then there's some other innovation. People are there's new ones coming out, you're saying.
Exactly. So there's another the next one is the gastric inhibitory peptide, which is sort of a cousin of GLP-1. And it looks like when you put them together, you get more efficacy. And because the mechanism, you could potentially take it less frequently. So Amgen is testing it monthly now. And in one of their studies, they're even testing it, every 2 months or maybe every 3 months. And we're waiting for that data later on this year. Then there's another class, they're called amylin. Um, that's another sort of, these are all gut peptides slash sort of hormones. And amylin is also really, really effective in, the issue with the GLP-1s is, as you mentioned, you feel full, you have nausea and vomiting early on. With amylin, it's another mechanism that could be complementary, boost your weight loss, and reduce your nausea and vomiting. So that's something very promising being tested together. These are all injections. And then we have some of the orals, the oral GLP-1s. They're not going to be as potent as the injectables, but they're oral. And patients love oral drugs for obvious reasons. So many people would rather not lose as much weight and not take an injection.
I was reading, and I guess from maturity of market, and maybe I'm just the demographic. I get bombarded by these ads constantly. I don't know what they see that I'm seeing this, but I was looking at your research, and I think it said that only it was a 2% of overweight and obese individuals are using it, and 25% stay on for more than 1 year. And so when you think about, like I said, the maturity of this market, and maybe why the equity markets aren't as excited about where it's going, is something being missed here? Do you think the market is much bigger? I mean, it depends on, I guess, coverage, and again, the how easy it is to take it in terms of oral drugs versus other ones.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. So the equity markets have gotten to a point that they're beginning to realize, look, this is going to be a really big class. And as you know, valuations typically get ahead of themselves and then they sort of correct. And we've been in the correction phase now. And I think they started to correct because people started realizing there's a lot of competition. There's going to be a lot of options. Um, as there's more and more drug makers making these drugs, the ability to differentiate gets a little bit more limited. On the biotech side, some of the smaller biotechs still developing the orals or sort of next generations. We're trading at really nice valuations based on takeout premiums. And we haven't seen really takeouts recently. We saw them early on, but not recently. So those valuations corrected. Novo and Lilly's valuation corrected to adjust for competition and market sizing, and the fact that they can't pull these off-label, sort of unapproved compounders off the market. So people are still going to get these drugs, not from Novo or Lilly, but from mom and pop, compounder in Ohio or Florida or in the UK.
Is that a trend, like the people, getting the smaller places to do the compounders? Is that a threat for just this, or is it a threat for other types of medications that'll be coming out soon?
Good question. It's a threat. This is a specific situation because compounding is actually not legal. You can compound a drug that is in a certain formulation. A pharmacy and a hospital is allowed, if they're regulated, to change that. I'm going to make it up from an IV bag into an injection into the skin type thing. They're not allowed to just take somebody's drug and start compounding it. This was so unique because demand was so huge and they just did not have enough supply. And because of it, those compounders took off. And FDA regulates it, and they've been sending them letters to cease and desist. And we're seeing some litigation now, but it's so prevalent that it's going to be hard to pull it off the market.
Fascinating. Okay, that was
The other
go ahead,
element,
sir.
by the way, I should also add, Kim, is what's unique also here. Typically, if you think about it, in most places around the world, you go to the doctor, you see them, they write a prescription, you go to a pharmacy, and you get the drug. So you get it via the physician. Now, because of telemedicine, what both Novo and Lilly have been doing is now they are partnering up with some of these LifeMed and Hims, some of these, some other companies, and you can telemedicine with a physician and then get a prescription and then get it directly from like Novo Direct or Lilly Direct or through those partners. So now they're beginning to actually sell these drugs directly to patients without reimbursement. It's obviously approved, but that's unique and that's new. And that's probably a trend that's going to continue from now on.
Okay, so that's what's happening with obesity. Cardiology, what's happening?
In cardiology, there are a two-prong approach to innovation. One is either targeting the bad cholesterol, LDL, in a more profound way, and that's still very much underway. There are also other cousins of LDL, one of them which is called LP little a. It's another form of the bad cholesterol. That's not modifiable by diet or exercise. It's actually genetically based, and you can do a genetic screen and realizing that, hey, that patient, they might be a 35-year-old marathon runner, and they have a very high risk of potential heart attacks because they have high LP little a levels. So there's a lot of innovation in that sense, and we're going to start seeing that data soon. And then there's a lot of innovation as well in patients that have very high levels of fats, triglycerides, in their blood, and that causes an inflammation of the pancreas, and it could lead to pretty poor outcomes and a lot of pain. And so there's a lot of innovation in reducing these high triglyceride levels. And then finally, in heart failure that is due to genetic mutations in what's known as the TTR gene. There is several companies now with approval and soon more approval that are targeting that specific, it's called cardiomyopathy and heart failure. So that's really exciting.
What about endocrinology?
Yeah. So in endocrinology, there's, I would say, a wave of innovation for rare diseases, like all kinds of patients that have growth hormone deficiencies in making longer growth hormones. There's other patients that have morphological or genetic issues with their bones that lead to their bones to be shorter, and they have short stature or dwarfism. It's called achondroplasia. It's genetically based, and so there's new modalities to treat that and new injections and oral drugs that are going to dramatically improve outcomes there. There's other conditions where bone disorders, where patients are born again with a mutation, and because of it, these patients, when they're kids, they can have 20 fractures a year type thing. And so there's new studies underway, new modalities to make these bones stronger by addressing some of the underlying issues. And then there's all kinds of rare, again, mutational-based obesities that could be behavioral. There's Prader-Willi syndrome, which is also very much a neurobehavioral condition. But there's really a lot. There's also diseases that there's actually therapies now for giganticism, for acromegaly, for patients that have very low PTH levels. So there's really now a revolution going on in endocrinology.
Hmm. And neurology. Tell me, this is interesting too, because this is both like neurology and psychiatry as well too.
Yeah, so there's much better drugs now for depression, for schizophrenia, for bipolar disorders. There are a lot going on in neurological conditions, be it in Alzheimer's. This drug is approved as we all know, the initial slew of drugs, the A beta, the amyloid reducing drugs, are approved and they're active, but they're not terribly active. There's innovation now with new modalities um, that are in kind of late stage development for Alzheimer's. A lot of innovation going on in Parkinson's. And then there's, a lot of the conditions are neurological, but the body's attacking itself. So we mentioned myasthenia gravis. There's also CIDP. There's congenital myasthenic syndromes. There's ALS. So there's a lot of disorders. There's another one called MMN. It's a multifocal motor neuropathy that has profound implications around the body. So there's a better understanding of how to target the immune system that's attacking the nervous system. And if you can reduce the immune system from attacking the nervous system, you'll have much better outcomes. So that's an area of innovation too, with really promising results.
And what else? What other areas are you? I mean, there's so many, but what other areas are catching your eyes or your eye for innovation?
Yeah. So asthma is an area where, again, new biologic drugs have made big inroads and are in outside and producing outsized effects and outcomes. Also, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases or COPD, and it's relating to emphysema and smokers. It's an area that there's been desperation for new therapies for literally decades, and now we're seeing a slew of new therapies making a lot of promise. And then finally, inflammatory bowel disorders. As some of our consultant experts are saying, in a facetious sort of way, it's quote unquote a great time to have inflammatory bowel disease because there's literally tens of new drugs now being developed and approved for Crohn's disease, for ulcerative colitis. The innovation is still just starting.
And what is driving? We're kind of jumping categories here, and the next thing, but what is driving all this novel new therapies that are available for people? Like, what's different?
What's different? Yeah, great question. Number one, understanding biology is different now, driven by the genetic revolution from 20 years ago. So there's much better understanding what causes disease, and it starts at the genes, and then it goes into when things go wrong in the body and why they get there, and then understanding on top of it how to then design a drug to target this. Either it's better understanding of what exactly you're trying to hit, whether it's some kind of a protein in the body, and having much better tools now to understand what that protein looks like, and then how to dock a drug in there to fix it or prevent it from doing whatever it was doing that caused the disease. There's also better tools now. There's gene therapy. There's all kinds of genetic manipulations. We've had antibodies, for a long time. These are Y-shaped sort of, drugs that go and hit specific things in the body and turn them on or off. Now those antibodies are a lot more sophisticated. You can have 2 or 3 different payloads on there and targets. You can have cell therapies where you're taking normal cells in the body and turning them into missiles, into doing things. And obviously much better ways to also design hormones or peptides, and even how to design just oral pills that are much more potent and safer. Everything.
And what? And so, I mean, obviously, these are basic questions, but what's driving this is better knowledge. It sounds like it also allows you to treat diseases sooner, maybe sooner or you can treat them sooner in the evolution of the condition as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's leading to earlier diagnosis and earlier, and I would say either really early because of preventative measures or earlier because of better diagnosis. And it could be because of genetics, doing a genetic test and realizing, aha, this patient has a very specific issue here. Whereas before, they might have been misdiagnosed for several years, or maybe they would have never been diagnosed correctly. So all of those are really driving this innovation.
Can you tell me a bit more about on the cancer side too? You mentioned there's a lot happening and some really exciting work there. What is notable for you in terms of where that side of things is going?
Yeah. So one of the new, not so new, but now a lot more prevalent is taking an antibody. And again, an antibody, cancer cell is a normal cell that's going haywire and is overactive usually. It's changing. And now it's either a normal cell that's just populating out of control, or it's a cell that used to be normal, it's no longer normal, and now it's metastasizing everywhere, and taking up space and causing a lot of issues. So you can design an antibody and to something that's only shown on the cancer cell on the outside of it, but not on a normal cell. And it's a missile. It's like a cruise missile that goes and hits that. And then the immune system follows it and attacks it. So it's almost like a cruise missile followed by an army. And that's exactly what happens. You're getting the immune system to go attack it. Another way to do it is do that cruise missile that has an extra bomb on it. And that extra bomb could be a chemotherapy agent on it. So instead of taking chemotherapy as a pill or as an IV that just goes everywhere in your body and kills anything that's dividing, so your hair cells, your skin, your cells that are your blood cells, your GI lining, and has all these side effects, you only put it on top of a cruise missile, an antibody that only hits the cancer cell. So now you're getting much better killing and much fewer side effects equals much better efficacy and outcomes. So that's new. There's some of these antibodies can have bispecifics. They can go hit the cell and grab an immune cell and bring the immune cell right to the cancer cell and say, hey, immune cell, here's that cancer cell you're supposed to kill. It's right here. It's literally next to you. Now kill it. So these are bispecific. And then finally, there's cell therapies where you take an immune. The problem with cancer is it's hidden from the body. It's there, but the immune system can't see it because it's very smart. So now you can take a cell, an immune cell, and change it, and suddenly that immune cell in the body it's like the Matrix, the movie. It just sees cancer, and it just goes and takes it out.
And is fascinating. Which cancers right now are the ones that you're seeing this treatment targeted to, and which maybe just kind of let us know where do you see the growth in the market for this as we go forward? Because I know this is all intertwined, right? It's not just having the fundamentals, it's not having the therapies. It's does it get funded and who's funding it and does it get covered?
Absolutely. So, in blood cancer, that's cancer that originated from cells in the blood. White blood cells, red blood cells. Things like that. Um, when you use a cell therapy, because these are cells are floating in the blood, it's perfect. These are cell armies that are designed to go find what's wrong in the blood and kill it. So you're seeing a lot in leukemia, you're seeing a lot in lymphoma, you're seeing a lot in myeloma, and the outcomes there are tremendously better. And these used to be fairly deadly diseases. There has then been a lot of innovation with taking oral drugs for breast cancer, for lung cancer, for all kinds of GI cancers, and turning off cells that are mutated and becoming cancer. And this is because of the genomic revolution, understanding how genomics works and how the cancer cell changes. You can design a small molecule, pill that will go and target that cell. And then, as I mentioned, antibodies and the antibody drug conjugates with the chemo on them. So the ADCs, the antibody drug conjugates, really are the new frontier in anti-cancer treatment. And that's for things like all kinds of GI cancers, prostate cancers, head and neck cancers. There's a lot going on.
Hmm. Um, I'm going to jump around here a bit too. And what is the path for these companies in terms of commercializing a lot of these technologies right now? Is it easier now than it was 2 years ago, or is it harder?
Great question. So it's easier because of three reasons. I would say number one, the effectiveness of these drugs is so high that in so many ways they sort of market themselves, right? And they're either providing something outsized that's better than what's out there, or they might be actually the first drug approved for a certain condition. So in that sense, you don't need massive sales forces. Two, it's the advent of using AI to find patients and target physicians and educate physicians online. So because of it, you don't need as big a sales forces. And because of that, increasingly biotech is keeping rights, commercial rights, and launching themselves, at least in the US. But it's also harder. And the harder part actually is the reimbursement and pricing globally, including in the US. Pricing and access has been under pressure pretty much everywhere around the world since the 2008 financial meltdown, as budgets have tightened. So in that sense, getting reimbursed is harder.
And so that's the, I mean, and what this again, another basic question: how important is reimbursement to the success of a drug? Because when you mentioned with something like the GLP-1s, you've got people who are just bypassing this because they want to get what they want to get. But obviously, that's probably a small cost drug compared to some of these drugs, I'm sure, in the tens of thousands for serious conditions.
Exactly, absolutely. So, the price of the drug is usually proportional to inversely proportional to the number of patients, the cost of development, and then the actual level of innovation and reduction of cost of the system. So GLP-1s are not as expensive because they're going to target hundreds of millions of people around the world. Something for cancer, much more expensive, and so it's not reachable in out of pocket. So reimbursement is extremely important. In the US, as you know, we have our own unique and complicated healthcare system. It's not nationalized like in Canada or most of Europe. So there is a government payer, but it's very bifurcated. There you can set your own price. The government will negotiate with time. But what they do is they restrict reimbursement. So you have to start with a cheap generic, and you might not get to the innovative drugs until you fail two or three other drugs.
Yeah. Let me ask you, we kind of mentioned like all the amazing ways, the new pathways that drug makers are looking to create new therapies for people. And I know that we had talked to you earlier about the role of AI. And it's somewhat exhausting to kind of go through all the ways that AI is hitting the sector. But maybe if you could just kind of give us the list. When you think about all the ways that AI is making these new modalities possible, these new populations accessible, or I mean, it's influencing almost everything.
That's very true. So we can probably simplify it into four very big sort of overarching buckets. The first one is, how do you discover a new disease, a new area, to then and design a drug for it. Okay, so now that's all the stuff you do, looking at genes, looking at cell cultures, looking at mass population data, and then working on the computer or with a chemist or a biologist to design the drug. Then you need to start testing the drug both in the lab, in animals, and then in patients. And then there's the drug development area, the wet lab automation, excuse me, recruiting patients for clinical studies. Then you need to make it, and there's a whole bioproduction and production of these drugs. And then finally, getting it to the patient on the physician side and the provider side, helping diagnosis, populate electronic medical records, stay on top of test results, find patients, and and do prevention. So these are sort of all the buckets, and AI is definitely hitting all of them.
And some of them, just to kind of give some examples I thought were pretty interesting, was, I guess AI is being used. You talked about, having better genetic information. So mapping, enzymes, receptors, proteins, all the things you were talking about on the cancer side. Like that's, I think maybe on the discovery side. There was a phrase here too that I wasn't familiar with: in silico testing versus the lab. What does that mean, in silico testing?
Yeah, so my team specifically covers AI for biotech, and I have to be honest that I kept on hearing in silico testing, and I kept on nodding my head until one day I was like, I have no idea what does in silico testing actually mean. Like, do you actually put it in some kind of a chip, or like how does this work?
Yeah.
In silico means using a computer to test a drug, and so the novelty now with AI and all these computational tools is you can look at, let's say you discovered that there's a gene, you looked at population data in a million patients that have XYZ condition, and you realized 20% of them have this abnormal gene. Huh, that's a great, so something is not right with this gene in 20%. That's a clear signal. You begin to look at that gene. You can now use a computer to tell you, hey, what does this gene do? And what is in the gene? It will come back and say it's a protein. Well, back in the days, you had to go and now make the protein in cell cultures and purify it and figure out. And it's not that easy to do. Now you can tell a computer, hey, can you show me what does this protein look like? Now it's not perfect yet, but you will show you what does the protein looks like. And you can imagine the protein doesn't just sit there like a picture. It's constantly moving and changing. So you can simulate that. And based on that, you can start thinking, aha, this is how I can design a drug now to hit this protein. And you can say, hey, system, let's work together to create a drug for this
Hmm.
and simulate how the drug and maybe help me understand how this drug and the structure will behave in a human being. Because not all drugs behave the same way. Some of them are going to be very short acting. People are not going to want to take 10 pills a day. Some of them can cause a lot of toxicity. So you can start using AI to help you with that. These are all supportive tools. And then you can say, hey, I want to make this drug. This drug I can make in a test tube. Let's figure out how to change it so I can produce it in mass volume. And then, so you can constantly fine tune, and that's called in silico. And at that point, you're like, great, now I have 10 different drugs to actually test using my robot in a wet lab. Uh, you can see all of this, the time to market, your ability to power up what you're doing and ultimately design better drugs faster, cheaper is what AI is all about.
It's amazing. I mean, I think, at a very basic level, we've heard of, the coding in AI right now, we hear is better than some of the best coders, period. Are there drugs now that have been brought to market purely through AI with like limited, you hear about one person could be $1 billion company. Is this where it manifests in your
So
world?
we're not there yet. These are supportive tools. You know what I mean? It's like using AI. AI is sort of better than traditional search engine to give you an answer. But you're right. It's like you don't just say, make me a report about asthma, and boom,
Yeah.
you have a whole. So these tools are still being developed. They're still being fine tuned. It's all based on inputs no matter what, despite how good these models are and how better they're becoming and more powerful, you still need to test them and you still need to give them feedback. So someone needs to actually go and test the drug and come back and say, nope, this drug is not good enough. The computer, your AI system, you thought it's going to dock well into this pocket and this protein, into this parking space, so to speak. Hey, that parking space is a lot tighter than you think it is. So we're not quite there. These are very powerful tools. They make things faster, but and ultimately they will get you better results faster, cheaper, but they don't replace the human beings.
And when you think about just bouncing back into the capital markets side of thing, where are the interesting, and again, we can't talk specific names, but when you think about, who's leveraging AI best in this space, are there specific players that only focus in this area?
There are definitely players that are focusing, and early on, these companies went public, back in the biotech bubble, let's say during COVID, and there was so much excitement, and they thought that they could do a lot altogether. Oh, we can design drugs, we can find the targets, we can literally use, patient level data from 1 million patients, driving it through our system, and it's all going to be seamlessly integrated. And we can even take pictures in cells with robotics and load that into the system and find out how well it's working. Honestly, those companies that thought they're going to have one turnkey solution for everything did not succeed as much as those that said, I'm only going to work on designing molecules in silico. I'm only going to work on making better antibodies faster and in a more potent and specific and powerful way. So usually you do need to specialize because it's too complicated and there's a lot of ground to cover. So there's a lot of different companies working on that, doing very well. Many companies are now using AI to recruit patients a lot faster, and they can figure out which clinical centers to go to, who will be very fast recruiters of patients. They're using AI now, in automation, in warehousing, in distribution centers, using it in robotics. A lot going on in synthetic biology, and a lot going on in, also biological security. So there's many companies doing different things, and increasingly, even every company now that's big and sizable has some AI capabilities internally too. They have to have it.
Two things. First, I was going to say, I guess the interesting thing with you just said with AI too is that by finding patients more easily, they're increasing the size of their market, their addressable market at the same time. So that's pretty compelling. One thing we've been talking, painting this broad picture, but I've been thinking I'm talking more about what's happening more probably in Western Europe, North America, the United States, like more of those things. China has also had, and I think I quote one of your reports, growing biotechnology prowess. What's happening in China?
Yeah. So China um, is a going to become a powerhouse in biology and drug development. And they're not going to, they are getting there now. They are a very fierce competitor already. They're not at the level of the US, but we've seen figures that if you if you remember back around 2011 or so, the Chinese Communist Party decreed that they want to make biotech one of their key strategic imperatives. And as you know, the way China, it's a very powerful model. It's a communist regime, but it's not really necessarily acting in a communist way. And so what they've been doing is essentially providing subsidies and support to biotech companies that are locally, grown in China, um, and helping them prop them up while actually fostering competition among them. That's exactly what they've done with shipping historically. It's exactly what they've done with chips. And they let them duke it out internally, and inevitably winners will emerge, which can then potentially grow and go more global. And so, as you know, there's been many Chinese nationals that have been educated in the US and Western universities. Many of them historically would go back and bring all that knowledge back to China. So they're a lot more innovative now. If you look at their publications, China, I believe, is the third biggest, um, kind of country globally in terms of medical literature. Beijing is a city, I believe, is in the top five, and it might actually number three in the number of publications globally. Obviously the U.S. dominates. The U.S. still is, a 50% share, but China, as its own country, is getting as big as Europe. Not quite sure that it got to be as big as Europe. So what does that mean? They have a healthy local biotech community making drugs for the Chinese national market, Chinese domestic market. There's a lot of competition there, so pricing is always, under pressure. Historically, they have emulated and copied our drugs. They didn't always respect intellectual property, which has been an ongoing issue. But now they've become innovators. And so there's actually a lot of drugs that are being made in China that are now getting licensed to Western companies to then bring them to the US and Europe and develop them and then market them in the US and Europe. So they're also now competing for the source of innovation. There's a lot of consternation and concern about that, whether that's actually good for US and European biotechs or not. Again, mind you, if you license the drug early, most of the profits will ultimately get recorded and booked by those US and European companies. But they inevitably are competing for the innovation that was previously done mostly in the US and in Europe a little bit.
Hmm. I think I was looking, and I saw in the Wall Street Journal saying that China is also having its DeepSeek moment in biotech.
Their bar to getting things to market is lower than in the US, and that's specifically for cell therapy. So in China, you can develop a cell therapy a lot faster than you can in the US because of regulatory conditions. And so that's given them an edge. And there's actually a lot of innovation has happened out of China, and it's made its way into the US. Because of all of this, by the way, as you know, the US Congress and the US government got pretty concerned and alarmed that China is unfairly um, protecting its own market against external innovation, uh, providing subsidies and artificially boosting their own innovation landscape, which then they intend to take globally, either with lower pricing, stop making drugs that they can take into Southeast Asia, maybe Latin America, maybe into Africa, areas that historically could not handle sort of US and European pricing, which will give them potentially political clout over time. A lot of the Chinese market was very much tied to the People's, Liberation Army of China, and that's been a lot of concern. And because of it, there's been a lot of legislation in Congress to do what's known as the bioterror sort of protection act, which actually did not ended up going through. But the U.S. absolutely is now determined to continue to maintain its innovation. and leadership in the world, and they really view China to be the emerging competitor.
I want to kind of net this out to kind of say, given all of this, your outlook. But before we get there, too, I want to talk a bit about just the capital markets. I mean, there's markets are their jobs digest all the information and put it into a price and tell people what they think. When you think about, I'd say the fundamentals in this sector really have never been more exciting or never looked better. There's so much innovation going on, but you've got an administration in the U.S. that is very pro AI and pro innovation, but there's puts and takes maybe on the regulatory side, on the health side, and what's happening. You've got intense competition from China. You're talking about how do you like what do you when you look at that and what's priced in the market? What's exciting to you? What are you kind of scratching your head about?
Yeah. So biotech, as you recall, during COVID had its probably its biggest heyday, and really was in vogue. There was an sort of endless appetite in biotech from specialists and obviously generalists. And the healthcare specialists are always buying and selling biotech stocks, but we really need to get the generalist funds to be involved in the sector. And right now, they've pretty much after the end of COVID, they've all exited. Um, they all exited for a variety of reasons, some of which valuations got, very, very high and ahead of themselves. The cycle of innovation is exciting. It is. There's always a lot of failures, and perhaps they weren't as cognizant of it, or maybe just kind of when it becomes very obvious, um, they start exiting. Also, people started realizing the COVID cycle was ending, so the excitement around biotech started to subside. But also, of course, that's exactly when AI hit. So right now, one of the biggest issues for biotech is that many big funds, generalist funds, say, I could buy a biotech XYZ company, or I can buy more Nvidia, or I could buy more, Alphabet. And those stocks are doing so well, the Mag 7s, or at least most of the Mag 7s are still doing that well, that they don't need to be in biotech. So that's kind of where we are. On top of it, um, you want to be involved in biotech during the innovation cycle. And of course, we always have innovation, but we don't really have a lot of imminent innovation that's going to be completely sizable and going to market. And a lot of the bigger biotech companies have been around for a while, and now they're beginning to face some patent losses as their drugs go off patent. So we always have innovation, but we're not sort of in an outsized new innovation cycle. And people are obviously focusing on AI. And of course, now there's a lot of concerns about drug pricing globally, um, especially in the US, driven by President Trump, a desire to put a lot of tariffs on pharma companies. And he's also saying that, look, the US pays an outsized share of drug pricing globally that funds innovation. Most of the drugs globally are produced in the US. And it's because the environment here rewards innovation with high price for the risk. I know that there's a popular perception that it's National Institute of Health or the U.S. government that pays for the innovation. That's not the way it works. It's venture capital money. It's public money that really funds the biotechs, and the sector overall does not make money. Probably 5-10% of companies are profitable. The rest of them are not. So that's why we need to have high drug pricing. But he's beginning to say, hey, why is the U.S. paying so much relative to Europe or the rest of the world? China and Japan, I mean, even Canada pays less. And so that's now being potentially negotiated as part of the tariffs. I think hopefully there's going to be a compromise with the industry. There's a lot of onshoring now, manufacturing from the rest of the world to the U.S., really for safety. So the U.S. won't have to be reliant on, let's say, China for a lot of our production in case there's ever going to be a political issue. And so there's a lot of things going on. And then finally, of course, with RFK Jr. Heading out the Department of Health and Human Services, and he is a critic in many ways of innovation in vaccines. FDA has become a lot more uncertain. The Center for Disease Control has become a lot more uncertain and unpredictable relating to vaccine regulatory oversight. And so the bottom line is when you have concerns about drug pricing and tariffs and potentially delays and uncertainty in getting drugs approved, the sector has been out of favor. It's bouncing back. Valuations are cheap. Everything is I think the worst case scenario is priced in. And at the end, the bite is a lot lower than the bark. And that's kind of what's going on typically, historically. And that's the way we think it's going to play out again. The sector is making a comeback, but it's still very much out of favor.
It's such a juxtaposition when you kind of see the fundamentals of what's happening in the industry to the capital market dynamics on the other side for all the reasons you just said. I have an entirely unfair question to ask you, Yaron, but I'm going to ask you anyway. 10 years from now, you and I are sitting down to talk about what's been happening. What's happened?
What's happened? Yeah. So probably if you look at things in the world, history repeats itself, and we actually do every year a piece early on in the year where we have two big benchmarks of what do we learn based on history as a predictor of what's going to happen for the year. And believe it or not, most of the time it's accurate. So historically, we go through cycles. Well, thankfully we have a big AI tech cycle. That cycle will have legs, and it's probably going to be longer than potentially historical cycles, just given the innovation. But it does come to an end. At the end of the day, the concerns about regulatory, there's times where FDA is very, very amenable and pro-innovation and predictable, and there's times where the FDA is a lot less predictable. And now we move from the golden years of the FDA to a more unpredictable environment. We do think that's going to correct over time. The concerns about, most favored nation drug pricing and tariffs, that will get resolved sooner than later. And at the end, the U.S. government is not trying to destroy biotech. Biotech wants they are intent of making biotech one of the core dominant global industries that is originating mostly in the U.S. And they want to protect that. We do think all those concerns will be put to rest. There's going to be a compromise. Innovation will carry the day. We're all human beings. We all need new therapies and innovation, in terms of outcomes. And so we do think the sector will come back, and there's going to be, another kind of heyday for biotech. It's probably still another 2 or 3 years away. Honestly, hard to know. The sector's already trading better. We're constructive. I wouldn't say we're bullish on the sector right now. We're constructive, and I think valuations are very appropriate and frankly attractive.
Last question for you. What have I not asked that I should have asked you for someone who's trying to understand what's going on right now?
That's a great question, and I would say, what are the telltale signs to know early innings the biotech is coming back? And that's always hard to know, and I think it's very much tied to what's going on with the Mag 7, the Magnificent Seven, and in some ways, not all 7 of them are quite magnificent anymore. And what is that cycle of AI? Because at the end of the day, if you kind of think about innovation globally, innovation happens in tech, it happens in biotech, it happens in fintech, it happens to a certain degree in energy, right? That's kind of where innovation happens. And a lot of it historically originated from the US, Europe also, but Europe's always been fragmented, and China is obviously a big competitor. But when the tech cycle comes to an end or matures, I think people are going to go back, and biotech usually then screens pretty well. So that's the things to watch.
Yaron, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Good seeing you. Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Money Talk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth, recorded on September 3rd, 2025. The information contained herein has been provided by TD Wealth and is for information purposes only. The information has been drawn from sources believed to be reliable. The information does not provide financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. Particular investment, tax, or trading strategies should be evaluated relative to each individual's objectives and risk tolerance. The views expressed are those of Yaron Werber, Managing Director, Senior Biotechnology Analyst, TD Cowen, as of September 3rd, 2025, and are subject to change based on market and other conditions. Certain statements in this presentation may contain forward-looking statements that are predictive in nature and may include words such as expects, anticipates, intends, believes, estimates, and similar forward-looking expressions or negative versions thereof. Forward-looking statements are based on current expectations and projections about future general economic, political, and relevant market factors, such as interest and foreign exchange rates, equity and capital markets, the general business environment, assuming no changes to tax or other laws or government regulation or catastrophic events. Expectations and projections about future events are inherently subject to risks and uncertainties, which may be unforeseeable. Such expectations and projections may be incorrect in the future. Forward-looking statements are not guarantees of future performance. Actual events could differ materially from those expressed or implied in any forward-looking statements. A number of important factors, including those factors set out above, can contribute to these digressions. You should avoid placing any reliance on forward-looking statements. Full disclosures for all companies covered by TD Securities can be viewed at tdcowen.bluematrix.com/southside/disclosures.action. Available to TD Securities institutional equity clients. For additional TD Securities disclaimers, please visit www.tdsecurities.com/ca/en/global disclaimer. TD Securities is the trade name which TD Securities and TD Securities USA jointly use to market their institutional equity services. TD Securities is a trademark of the Toronto-Dominion Bank representing TD Securities, TD Securities USA, TD Securities Limited, and certain corporate and investment banking activities of the Toronto-Dominion Bank. TD Wealth represents the products and services offered by TD Waterhouse Canada, TD Waterhouse Private Investment Council, TD Wealth Private Banking offered by the Toronto-Dominion Bank, and TD Wealth Private Trust offered by the Canada Trust Company. The TD logo and other TD trademarks are the property of the Toronto-Dominion Bank or its subsidiaries.